Okay, today we will discuss or illustrate the limit laws. So first we have the limit of a constant. So the limit of a constant k as x approaches c is simply k. So we'll have some examples. So for example number 1. So the limit of 2 as x approaches c is simply k, which is equal to 2. Then the limit of 3 as x approaches 1 is just 3. Then the limit of 5 as x approaches 2/3 is simply 5. Then the limit of 1 as x approaches -1/2 is just simply 1. So bisan unsay gi-approach nga value sa x, as long as given ta og constant k, ang yang limit ana is simply the constant. Our next rule is the identity rule. So it states that the limit of x as x approaches c is just equal to c. So we'll have some examples. So the limit of x as x approaches 9 is equal to 9. So muna siyang identity or simply the substitution law. Kung unsay x nga gi-approach, unsay constant nga gi-approach sa x, mawara po na siya iyang limit. So for example, number 2. So the limit of x as x approaches -10, so yung limit niya is atorang i-substitute ang value nga gi-approach sa x, which is -10. Then the limit of x as x approaches 0.005 is simply 0.005. Then the limit of x as x approaches 2/3 is equal to 2/3. For our next rule, we have the constant multiple rule. Okay, so we have this limit and then it is multiplied by a constant k. So kaniya constant k, pwede ni siya atro siyang i-write outside of the limit and then evaluate kung unsa ni siya nga limit, then whatever this limit L, atro siyang i-multiply sa k. So for example, we're given the limit of function of x as x approaches c is equal to 4. So find for letter A. So we're going to find the limit of this function of x multiplied by 8 as x approaches c. So given taog limits of the function of x as x approaches c is equal to 4. So using this constant multiple rule, kaning 8 ato ran siyang ipagawa sa equation, or ato siyang ipauna. So may mo siyang 8, then the limit of function of x as x approaches c. Then given man ta nga kaning the limit of this function as x approaches c equals 4, so kani siya equal man ni siya og 4, ma-simplify na ni siya og 8 times 4, which is equal to 32. Okay, for letter B. So the limit of the function of x over 2 as x approaches c. So kaning over 2 ato na siyang maririte as this function multiplied by 1/2. So ngayon mo na siyang, og ato ning i-write, we have the limit multiplied by 1/2 times the function of x as x approaches c. Then kaning 1/2 ato siyang i-write outside sa limit limit function. We have 1/2 that's the limit of function of x as x approaches c. Then kabalot na nga kaning limit of function of x as x approaches c equal siya og given siya nga 4. So ngayon mo na siya 1/2 times 4 or 4/2, which is equal to 2. For number 3, so again this our given limit is multiplied by a constant 3/2. So kaning 3/2 ato ra siyang ipauna. So mahimon na siyang 3/2 multiplied by the limit of function of x as x approaches c. So that will be 3/2 times 4. So we have 3 times 4, 12 divided by 2. 12 divided by 2 is 6. Okay, let's discuss the power rule. So if we have the limit of the function of x raised to the power n as x approaches c, this is simply the limit of this function raised to the power n, or just simply L to the n, or the limit of this function raised to the power n. Say for example, we are given the function of x as x approaches c is equal to 4. If we're going to find the limit of this function raised to the power cube, it is simply following this rule. So ato ni siyang rewrite. So we have the limit of the function of x as x approaches c raised to the, so that is cube, so that is also raised to the power cube or raised to the power 3, or simply ang limit niya is 4 man, so that is 4 cube. Then solving for, or 4 is to the power cube, that is 4 times 4 times 4, which is equal to 64. For letter B, we have the same function raised to the power -2. So again, this is simply equal to kani siya nga function whole raised to the power -2. So we have the limit of function of x as x approaches c raised to the -2. or 4 raised to the minus 2. Then we have to simplify so that we'll have no negative exponent. So 4 raised to the minus 2 is equal to 1 over 4 squared, which is 1 over 16. Root rule. To find the nth root of the function of x as x approaches c, it is simply the nth root of the limit of the function of x as x approaches c, or simply the nth root of the limit. So, okay, we'll have some examples. So if we're given the limit of the function of x equals 4 as x approaches c, so find out the limit of the square root of this function as x approaches c. So given taog function of x, limit of the function of x as x approaches c, so the limit of this is equal to 4. And then we're going to find the square root of this function as, or the limit of the square root of this function as x approaches c. So applying this rule, so you just this is simply the square root of this whole expression. So mahimo na ni siya the square root of the limit of the function of x as x approaches c. And then given man tayo nga kanisang limit of the function of x as x approaches c is equal to 4, so this is simply the square root of 4, which is equal to 2. Okay, for letter B, so we're given this time atong function of x is equal to negative 4 as x approaches c. So we're going to find the limit of the square root of this function of x as x approaches c. So again, ato ra siyang i-rewrite. So kaning itong index na to, kanin siya tanan mo under the index sign. So we have the limit of function of x as x approaches c. Then kaning whole expression equal man siya og negative 4. So we have the square root of negative 4. And then can we take the square root of negative 4? So we cannot simplify this one unless kung ato na ta sa atong advanced topic nga imaginary numbers. But for the sum and difference rule, so if we're given the function of x plus function of x as x approaches c, so if this is sum, ang simple explanation ragudin niya is it is also the sum of the limits of ma difference, also difference of the limits. Okay, let's have some examples. Okay, so we're going to find the sum of the function of x and the function of j's function of x as x approaches 1. Then given ta nga ang limit in niya is equal to ang limit po sa chase function of x as x approaches 1 is negative 1. So, pangita pa sum, ato rang i-add simply ang iyang limits. But napamantay kon dere, namantay follow na to nga rule. So from here ato sa siyang rewrite. So mahimo ni siyang limit as x approaches 1, we have function of x plus the limit as x approaches 1 chase function of x equals, so this is given nga 2 and this one given nga negative 1. So we have plus, so plus negative 1. So 2 plus negative 1 is equal to 1. For number 2, it is the difference, or letter B, it is the difference. Then we're given the same limits. So again, at difference man siya, so ato na siyang i-follow. In this case, mag-una ang chase function of x may minasan sa function of x. So we have rewrite, we have the limit of chase function of x as x approaches 1 minus the limit of function of x as x approaches 1. Then this one is given as negative 1 minus function of x is 2, so minus 2. So minus 1 minus 2 is equal to negative 3. For the product rule, again, it is simply the product also of the limits. So if we're given function of x multiplied by chase function of x as x approaches c, so if we will multiply this one, we will simply multiply the limits. Say for example, we're given these expressions. So the limit of the function of x as x approaches negative 3 is 9. So the limit of this one is 9. Then the limit of chase of x as x approaches negative 3 is negative 3. So the limit of this expression is negative 3. So if we're asked to find the product, so we'll just multiply 9 times 3. But first, ato siyang i-write in this manner. So we have limits sa function of x at x approaches 3. This is actually the limit of function of x as x approaches, given na to is negative 3 multiplied by the limit of chase of x as x approaches negative 3. So this is So kini siya is 9. So 9 times this one is negative 3 atong equal. I-parenthesis para dili ta ma-confuse sa sign. So 9 times negative 3 is negative 27. For the quotient rule, again, it is simply the quotient of their limits. So if we're given the limits of function of x divided by j's function of x as x approaches c, so it is simply the limit of function of x divided by the limit of the j's function of x as x approaches c, or L over m. So kung ang f of x mo i-divide sa g's of x, ang limit sa f of x should be also our numerator, and then the limit of g's of x will be our denominator. So okay, let's have some examples. So for letter A, so given taog these expressions, the limit of the function of x as x approaches negative 3 is 9. Then the limit of j's of x as x approaches negative 3 is equal to 3. Then for letter A, it is the f of x divided by g's of x. So it is simply 9 over 3 negative 3. So we have 9 divided by negative 3, negative 3. How about if the g's of x is the numerator and then f of x is the denominator? So the same, ato gyapon siyang i-follow. So in this case, ang g's of x nato is may itong numerator nga negative 3. Ang f of x nato is our denominator, which is 9. So ato na lang ning i-simplify. So divide both by 3. So mahimo ni siyang negative 1 over 3 or negative 1/3.